Yes, we can. How great was that last night when someone yelled, "Yes, we can." Okay, let's get this started.
Okay, we are Zooming and YouTubing, Tegan.
We are live, Chris. I mean,
Let's
we will
do
see.
this then. Let's do it. Welcome to Trial Balloon Live, which either will or will not be a regular live streaming and Zooming show. We have our remarkable Trial Balloon, Political Wire, and my newsletter community. We want to hear from you and for you to hear from each other. Let's just review the quick ground rules that we hope everyone will follow. Please practice good manners. This is meant to be a civil conversation. Please keep your mic on mute until you are called, and we have made some improvements. We're going to be able to see video when we promote people to ask questions. We should have the chat going. That was some of the feedback from last time. So huge improvements here on week 2. And when you're called on, please tell us your name, where you live, and as of now, who you plan to vote for. Tegan, anything to add?
Nope, that's good. This is the Democratic Convention halftime show. We're halfway through, Chris.
Halfway through, and I have not gotten much sleep. They took it really late or early into the morning, Monday night into Tuesday morning. That was not helpful. Last night was really, two, more than two, but those last two, just incredible speeches. Watched that, and then I ended up watching another like hour and a half, 2 hours of analysis. So yes, we're halftime, and I just need to get more sleep. Let's get right into it. Earlier today, you wrote about what you called the best delegate roll call in history. Democrats took it to a new level last night, you wrote. It used to be considered a necessary but bureaucratic ritual that was boring television. That changed in 2020 when Democrats did a really fun remote version during the pandemic. Adding music and a DJ to the mix this year was truly incredible. The roll call has always been fascinating to me because you get to watch party officials compete with their own politicians for the chance to announce their state's delegate tally. Some states tout their sports teams. We're looking at you, Wisconsin. Some highlight their geography. Some remind us of their incredible history, but it's all undeniably patriotic, especially when Governor Hochul of New York said, we are the greatest state in history. I think she said, right? The greatest state ever. It was
I mean,
pretty fun.
I live in New York. I think New York's just fine. I'm not sure it's the greatest state in
I know.
history.
I mean, it's really good. I like living here. It's really good, but yeah, I mean, the greatest state ever. Turning it into a party like the Democrats did last night was one of the most unifying things our country has done in years. I liked that was interesting to say unifying, and I think it was because it was a ton of fun. In terms of the numbers, first night, DNC averaged 20 million viewers across 13 networks, Deadline reported, surpassing the initial day of the RNC by about 2 million viewers. But the news got better last night. You just posted on Political Wire that the second night of the DNC saw a slight lift in viewership as 20.6 million people tuned in. That's about 500,000 more than the first night. Once again, besting the RNC, which, and this is an interesting point, suffered from a steep decline to just 14.8 million viewers in its second night. So we are at halftime. Two questions for you. One, are you still upset that they cut James Taylor on Monday night? And so far, are Democrats doing what they need to do with the DNC?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been, I mean, scheduling problems notwithstanding, and Monday night was particularly rough. I'm not upset that they cut James Taylor. I am a little upset that I didn't get to sleep till 1 a.m. or thereabouts. But it's been an amazingly successful convention. And that piece that I wrote earlier today about the roll call, it really did. It will change that delegate roll call forever. I mean, the Democrats took advantage of an amazing opportunity. And when we talk about the attendance, the viewership of the convention, it's important because the Republican convention lost about 4 to 5 million viewers from night one to night two. The Democrats increased their viewership. And strictly anecdotally, my wife was getting texts from friends saying, "Are you watching this?" And people were talking about this roll call because it was entertaining. It was really interesting to see. And, sure enough, she was not watching at the time. And she came into our family room and she decided to, watch it because it was so interesting. So you could see why the attendance, why the viewership numbers were up from night one to night two, because that's the type of thing that went viral. It was really interesting to see. And look, I'm a political junkie. I'm a sucker for watching these politicians and party officials jockey for the microphone, each state trying to put on their best face. I love hearing what they decide to talk about, what they decide to emphasize about their state, who they decide to allow speak. I thought it was really interesting last night when North Carolina, which has the youngest Democratic chair in the country, this young woman, she's in her early 20s, I believe. I've forgotten her name right now, but she was outstanding. And she's a party official, but the youngest Democratic chair in the country of a swing state now. The Larry Sabato just moved North Carolina yesterday back to toss-up category, which will be really interesting. And so the idea that you have, again, it's not a mistake that you have a young woman there. This theme that has been going through the first two nights of women and the really phenomenal women that Democrats have kind of on the bench or who are in that next generation ready to step up into leadership as they're about to tomorrow night nominate a woman for president of the United States. I mean, the whole thing is on message and on theme. And the only thing that makes me wonder is it doesn't seem possible that they could have planned all of this in just 4 weeks. So, I wonder what was the plan for a Biden convention? How much of it has changed because of the new nominee? And boy, it just must have been a ton of work over the last 4 weeks.
James Taylor was planned during the Biden DNC.
Well, that was only to make Joe Biden, look young. So,
Anyhow, I like James Taylor. We're getting some comments in the chat, including, by the way, from my mother. Uh, we like James Taylor. Another comment that we're getting. Yes, I'm aware there are many time zones. I was raised in Chicago. I went to school in California. I've lived in the East Coast. But it was late on the East Coast when the event ended. And as I think it was, a longtime reader and sometimes emailer to us, Jason Ginsburg noted that there are a large portion of the population in the East and Central time zones. So while the California people did get lucky, didn't have to stay up as late as we did, it was late on Monday. So what was different? So I agree with you. I think that I actually think that I feel like I'm seeing in various ways the stresses of having changed candidates only 4 weeks ago. It's my belief that's one of the reasons why things ran so long on Monday. I mean, it also had to do with the fact that apparently everyone but two, I think Axelrod posted that everyone except two speakers, Bashir and one other, went over in terms of the time they'd been given. So that one looked, but I think they were trying to jam way too much in there. And I felt last night it looked like they were going to be doing the same thing, but then everyone did kind of fast sprints to the mics and away from the mics and got right into it. It feels like there's a little bit of stress in terms of having changed that. But what about, so you mentioned the uh, number of extraordinary women speakers. You mentioned the woman from North Carolina who, yes, during the roll call, I think it was, as you said, was brought a ton of energy. What about Biden on Monday night?
You know, I have mixed feelings about Biden on Monday night. I mean, I think what was interesting is that Biden seemed to be speaking as he wanted to speak. I don't think that I think he got to give whatever speech he wanted to give. He got to use the tone that he wanted to give. This was his opportunity, his time, uh, to deliver his message, to reflect upon his administration however he wanted. Um, I don't think it was necessarily incredibly, it was not necessarily incredibly effective for the convention itself. The fact that it was pushed off until later hours was probably not a terrible thing overall for the convention. I think his speech was just fine. I don't think there was anything wrong with it. I thought it was interesting, though. It was the first time, and pretty much since he became president, that you kind of felt that Joe Biden could say exactly what Joe Biden wanted to say, that there was no couching of this at all. I also thought it's extremely genuine how Joe Biden uh, embraced Kamala Harris, how she said, I love you so much to him. That was through lip readers. And that I think it is very genuine that, when he stepped aside, I'm sure I would love to have been a fly in the wall. I'd love to know about the phone calls that they had, that he lined this up. Are you ready? He probably said, "Are you ready, kid? Are you ready to do this?" And until he was 100% confidence that she was ready, I don't think he was going to do anything or step aside. I mean, there will be great political books that will be written about this, after the election's all over. There's a bunch of stories that haven't been told, but that handoff that that he made privately, that we just saw publicly on Monday night, that's the story that I really want to read.
Uh, Paul, and I want to make sure, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's one of our viewers, listeners right now, points out two things. One, the other one who stayed on time was AOC. Thank you, Paul. And Paul also felt that 95% is his estimate of the Biden speech was what he wrote immediately. I would love Mel, PA, if you could raise your hand. And Bob Wells, we're going to get to you. There you are, Mel. Bob, we're going to get to you. I want to get to that question a little bit later. Here is Mel. Were you promoted to panelist, Mel? Let's try it again. What's going on? Why don't we do it this way then? Wasn't able to promote Mel to panelist, but Mel, if you could unmute and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
We
We
can.
gotcha.
All right, cool. Um, First of all, thanks for letting me get on here. And thanks for doing this, guys. This is really awesome. Um, my question was, I live in the Poconos. I'm in a red pocket of Monroe County in Pennsylvania, and most of my neighbors are saying that Kamala was not nominated by the people because she wasn't voted for in the primaries, that she was appointed by the party. They're kind of waffling in their support right now of Trump, but they say that, her being chosen is kind of off-putting to them. What is a person who's supporting her, can I say to them to dispel some of that unease?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's particularly interesting given your perspective that you're trying to talk to a voter to dispel the ease. As just a pure political junkie, I find it fascinating that we kind of went back into the days of the smoke-filled room where the candidates were chosen, and primaries were mostly irrelevant, and that we allowed the party bosses and in those days to choose the candidates that they thought would be best, would be best reflected before the voters. And in a way, that's kind of what happened. I mean, it was really a party boss of one, because Joe Biden wouldn't have stepped aside, I don't think, if he didn't know that it was going to be Kamala Harris. But at the same time, even if Nancy Pelosi was the one pushing him, or if Barack Obama was the one pushing him, they probably all had some consensus that she would be the candidate. I know we did tons of speculation about doing one of these rapid fire primaries, at the convention or the week before the convention. And while that would be all very exciting, and I'm sure the TV networks would love something like that, it just wasn't practical. I personally don't have any issues with the fact that there were no primaries. I find the primaries generally not helpful in terms of the candidates that we nominate, because only the most committed party members, typically towards the left of the Democratic Party, towards the right of the Republican Party, are the ones who take part in these primaries. That I think it creates more polarization than we otherwise would have. And so and I think we're seeing some of this, because I think we see that Kamala Harris is backed off some of the positions that she had 4 years ago when she ran in the Democratic primary, because she does not have to face Democrats in a primary. Her only goal is to appeal to voters in a general election, and particularly the swing voters in states like you're in, Mel. So I'm not sure what the best way is. I'd love to hear if other people have in the chat section, if other people have ideas about that. I'm not sure what you say to an actual voter, but as a political junkie, I have no problem with it.
I agree with that. I said the same thing, that because she was already on the ticket with Biden in 2020, that I voted for Biden in the primaries, with the understanding, because of his age and because of his possibility of not making it to election day, that she was also on his ticket. So a vote for him, in my mind, was a vote for her.
I think that's a great answer. I mean, and if something really unfortunate had happened to Biden, she'd be president of the United States right now, and no one would have a problem with it, because she was voted in as vice president. I get it if you're not a fan of Kamala Harris, and that you would have liked to have a primary and maybe have a Gretchen Whitmer or a Josh Shapiro compete for votes, but there was not enough time for that to really happen this time.
All right, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mel. I'd like to ask Zachary if you would raise your hand, because I want to get to the question that you've asked. But while we're waiting for that, do you feel, are they spending enough time so far on Kamala? I mean, there have been a couple of videos. There was The Protector. The second one, what was the second one last night? I think it was maybe like The Defender. They both felt very similar. They both started with the same shot of the sister. It made it feel like it was the same video until you really heard what the sister was saying, and you realized it was a different story. Obviously you had Doug Emhoff last night. That was, talking about Kamala. Michelle Obama and Barack Obama, they talked about Kamala, but talked about so much else in so many incredible ways that it was, a little bit more about them. There are others who have, I felt, hardly mentioned Kamala. Bernie Sanders mentioned her a little. Raphael Warnock, who was just a ridiculously incredible speaker, but to me, it felt like that was a lot about Raphael Warnock, and he mentioned Kamala a little bit. But do you feel like they're spending enough time building her story? Obviously, we've got, we're at halftime. We got 2 nights to go. There will be a lot more about that tonight. I bet you Tim Walz will spend a great deal of time talking about Kamala. But so far, do you feel like they're spending enough time there?
I think it's a good question. It's a valid question, but you have to think about what conventions are all about. Conventions are about, first and foremost, party unity. They're about putting forward an agenda that you're running on. And so a lot of these speeches, I mean, Joe Biden's speeches, most, unfortunately, even Michelle Obama's speech last night, is that really going to influence a swing voter in one of these states? I don't really think so. I think that the convention is mainly about pulling the party together, getting everybody on the same page. And I think so far, 2 nights in, the Democrats have done a very successful job at doing that. We did find out, though, yesterday, if you're relative to your question, Chris, yesterday with Doug Emhoff, that was by far the most interesting thing. If you're interested in more personal details of who Kamala Harris is, the video with her sister, I think, is also interesting, learning more about her upbringing. A lot of this kind of, as you and I discussed a little earlier today, Chris, a lot of this makes you wonder, like, how much about the vice president of the United States do we really know? I mean, we know that we know a little bit about her when she ran for president 4 years ago, but you don't pay a ton of attention over the course of the last 3.5 years to the vice president. It was interesting to listen to Doug Emhoff talk about their first date and him calling her at 8:30 in the morning, and how she, for 10 years running, makes him listen to that voicemail. That's all very interesting stuff. And I don't think it was really the Obama's place to talk about her personally, though Barack Obama did mention that she was on the ground in Iowa knocking on doors for his first run, which is really interesting because she was one of the earliest supporters of Barack Obama. And it was very clear after listening to both Barack and Michelle that they view her as much more so than they ever viewed Biden as the torchbearers, as someone who will carry on their legacy. And I think that Barack Obama, who is probably more responsible than anyone else for Donald Trump being on the political scene because he made fun of him at a White House Correspondents' Dinner, the idea that Barack Obama could pass the torch to a Black woman would just, I think, be extraordinary for his own legacy as a president. And I think that's really what his mission was there. But you're right. Tonight we'll probably hear more about who Kamala Harris is, but her real night, her personal night, will be on Thursday. And so that's when I think we hear the full Kamala Harris story.
One more call out to Zachary, if you would raise your hand so I can call on you for that question. So one of my kids just made that argument to me today, and I pushed back on it. You think that Trump ran because of that, the fun, Barack Obama making fun of him? I mean, what percentage? My kid said to me, if Obama hadn't have done that, Trump never would have run. And I was like, no, Trump was running for president, talking about it way before that. But now you just said that. Hopefully he's not listening, because he's going to be like, see, Tegan agreed with me.
Well, I mean, Donald Trump was talking about running for president for 20 years.
Yeah.
So obviously he had been talking about it. He clearly wanted to be president, but nobody ever thought he was going to run. I mean, you got to go back to 2015. Newspapers were not taking him seriously. The HuffPost started not covering it as political news. They started covering it as entertainment news. Everyone thought it was a ruse to get publicity. And then he just kept staying in the race, and then he ran. I actually do think that was the main impetus. I do think that the idea that Barack Obama could mock him publicly like that, I think it deeply hurt his ego, and we know how Donald Trump protects his ego. Was it the only thing? Of course not. There's all sorts of other factors, maybe the fact that The Apprentice was not being renewed or other things like this, and he had nothing to do, and this was a good thing to do. I don't think he thought he was going to win the race, and I think we have reporting that even the night before the election that or the night of the election, that he didn't actually think he could win. He had resigned himself that he was going to lose this race. But I do think it was a pretty important factor, and I think that the reporting suggests that it was as well. But and I will say this: I think that Barack Obama does feel probably guilty about it. I think if he could take it back, I think he would have ignored Trump at that White House Correspondents' Dinner.
The other point that I felt in Obama's speech, and before I make that, if Andrew, if who's in on his iPhone, if you've got a good connection, would you raise your hand? William Klein, would you raise your hand? And my good friend Chris, who's down in Florida, I assume right now, will you raise your hand as well? And we can maybe get your questions on here. When Biden, when Obama was commenting about Biden and he kept, called him his brother twice, he said a few other things. Did you feel like he was protesting a bit too much?
I did. I did. That's another one of the stories that I can't wait to hear more about after the election. No one's going to really talk much about it right now, but there are varying degree. The reporting shows varying degrees of trouble in the Biden-Obama relationship. It goes from, that Biden is really angry to the fact that maybe he's not as angry as has been said, but there has clearly been some unease there in that relationship.
Whoops, I was muting. There we are. Andrew, thanks for joining. Would you ask your question? I'm curious as well.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I was out to dinner. I'm Jewish, and I was out to dinner with some Jewish friends yesterday, and they asked us, they were talking with other Jewish friends who were concerned about voting for Harris and thought Trump would be much better in support of Israel. We both could not understand that position, but I guess there are people who are concerned that Harris would somehow be less supportive of Israel than perhaps Trump. What do you think she needs to do to change that perspective?
So I don't know. Have you seen, Andrew, that reporting today or over the last couple of days, actually, that Donald Trump has been talking to Benjamin Netanyahu in trying to make sure that he doesn't agree to a ceasefire or any
Yeah, I
sort
did
of
see
pause?
that. I saw one reporter had reported on that. I don't know if has it been confirmed yet?
It was a PBS NewsHour, so it
Yeah.
was, fairly relative outlet talking about reporting. I don't know if that's their reporters or other reporters. It was Judy Woodruff who said that. If true, it's an interesting question whether it's a violation of the Logan Act. It's certainly problematic politically for Trump if that was true. I don't know if we're going to learn if that is true or not. But if I were a voter concerned about Israel, which I am, I think I think that's extraordinarily problematic. It reminds me of the immigration deal, and that there's this bipartisan agreement to, push forward on immigration reforms that we've been waiting for 2 decades to finally solve some of the problems at the border, and Trump kills it simply for political reasons. If I were a supporter of Israel and that was a big issue for me and it was important to me, I'd be really worried that Donald Trump is trying to interfere in a peace process or a ceasefire agreement that is of no help to releasing hostages that are being held by Hamas, that is no help in achieving some sort of peace or some sort of, end of hostilities or pause in hostilities. I'd be extremely concerned that Trump acts on his own interests all the time. I mean, that's something that we heard from the Obamas last night. And so I think I think that's an extraordinary problem. And if true, I'd be very concerned about that. So I don't think that Kamala Harris's policies towards Israel are going to be that much dissimilar than Joe Biden's. I think she's indicated that. I think perhaps I don't even know if there's any daylight between her and Biden on whether or not, in terms of their own communications with the Palestinian American community. Kamala Harris has been reported that she has offered, more passes to the convention to some of these Palestinian groups. That she has, but Biden, of course, said in his own speech, he's like, the people protesting on behalf of the Palestinians, they have a point. He said that in his own speech. So I find I don't think there's going to be much daylight between the two candidates, really, between Biden or Harris. I mean, certainly not. I don't think there will be any daylight between now and the election in November, but I don't think there's any basis of trying to say that about her, moving forward if she were to be elected president.
Yeah, Andrew, I hear that a lot as well. And your question, is there anything, that Kamala could do? First of all, I found it interesting. I'm sure a lot of folks did. Doug Emhoff, certainly, who has taken a lead on fighting anti-Semitism and talking about hate. He certainly mentioned not only his Jewishness, but also the fact that Kamala has gone to synagogue with him, or goes regularly, goes every year, mentioned that. I hear the same comments that you are indicating. I think that Kamala's biggest challenge is with the and the point that she could make is, how does she engage with the progressive left of her party? I think that the friends of yours who are commenting that way and comment about Trump, because I agree with Hagen's point. I mean, can anyone argue? I mean, Trump is highly transactional, to the extent that those transactions, that type of action is, helpful to people who support Israel, then he would be there. And if it turns out that it's not, would he go someplace else? Maybe. I think it's certainly possible. But they point a lot to comments and activities from the far left of the party, which certainly exists, but I personally don't believe meets the represents the majority of the Democratic Party at all. There are various groups. I'm sure you're aware of the Democratic Majority for Israel. There are other groups that's run by Mark Mellman. There are other groups, so that are both moderate Democrats, even progressive Democrats, who talk about these types of issues. And so there are places to find other content like that. Anything else, Andrew, before we or find content if you're looking for more points on that? Anything else, Andrew? Otherwise, I'll thank you very much for a topic that is on many people's minds for sure. No, looks like
no, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a
Thanks,
lot.
Andrew.
William, there we go. William is coming on. William, you can, if you want to turn on your video, tell us where you are from, and maybe who you are supporting. And then if you would please ask the great question that you had in the Q&A.
Sure. Thank you both. Yeah, so I'm a Democratic consultant and a consultant to a national organization that most people have heard of. I've been split my time between Washington and upstate New York, where I'm living now. And I also have a Substack where it's a rare week where I don't quote Hagen, as I did today. He inspired me to write something about last night's roll call, and I happened to find an article that deconstructed every single state and explained the song choices. So I recommend that. But the other thing I want to say before I get into this, I also tend to quote Maggie Haberman a lot, and I think this is instructive, who says about Donald Trump, Mr. Trump has treated his own words as disposable commodities intended for single use and not necessarily indicative of any deeply held beliefs. I find that very instructive. But having said that, the words that we're being told to take seriously from Donald Trump and his retinue have to do with Project 2025. And my slightly contrarian question or position on this, it's something I'm maybe even resisting a little bit for the work I'm doing, I don't understand why there's this construct set up that seems to me removed from a messaging point of view to say, well, there's this think tank in Washington, and there's this 966-page book, and there are these people who advise a bunch of presidents. There's a guy named Ed Meese, and blah, blah, blah. Why can't we just say it's what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance want to do? Why? It seems almost like an elitist argument to talk about, and I'm sure it focus group and message and consultants love it, but it seems, I mean, it reminds me of Newt Gingrich and Frank Luntz's contract with America. Is that considered a great success in messaging? I'm interested to what you think about that.
It's a great question. I mean, I think that what the Democrats are doing is they're linking Trump to Project 2025. And the reason that Trump is trying to distance himself from it is really because it's not so much that it's an agenda that Trump is going to follow, because like you said, he follows whatever he thinks at the moment, or the last person he talked to. It's kind of irrelevant. He doesn't have some grand vision, some grand ideology like the drafters of Project 2025 have. But it's more of the case that the president is not just the president who we're electing, who's going into the government. It's all of the people around the president. And the simple fact is that Project 2025, these people will be involved in transition teams. Should Trump win, they'll be involved. A lot of the people worked in the former Trump administration. They will probably get jobs in the current Trump administration. And they have thought through an agenda, which to most voters sounds pretty extreme. And that these are, whether they follow all of it, whether they follow 20% of it, 50% of it, whatever it is, I think that's why Democrats are trying to link them to it.
What's the value of naming it, though? Why call it Project? Why not just say Trump and Vance?
I mean, I think Project 2025 sounds scarier, personally.
I do too. It's like this. It's this thing. And project. The word project, right, has a kind of evil scariness about it, I think.
Yeah, that's the part that I'm not sure about. I don't think a blue collar worker is going to really get that necessarily. They understand people, but I just don't understand. But everyone's doing it, so I'm doing it too. But that's why I'm pushing to call it the Project 2025 agenda instead of
William, I'll definitely agree with you. I don't think that the messaging has worked all that well at this point. I mean, I don't think that the average voter even knows what it is or is talking about it. When we saw Mallory McMorrow on the first night of the convention bring the big book out, I don't think that the whole thing went over all that well, but so I think they're still kind of struggling with how can they talk about this. So it'll be very instructive to see how Kamala Harris addresses it when she debates Trump, on September 10th. I think that will be interesting. Maybe she won't even refer to it as, maybe she'll take your advice and maybe she'll simply refer to some of these ideas. But it is an interesting point to bring up, I think, simply because Donald Trump has done everything in his power to distance himself, from it. And, he views it just as Donald Trump views what he did in his first term on abortion rights. He knows that that's radioactive and that's hurting him in this election. He knows that being linked to this is not good for him politically. And so his raw political instincts are telling him distance, and I think that's pretty instructive. Right. Yeah. So
William, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining. So we're getting a couple of questions on a common theme. And so Bob Wells, please stay with us. You're gonna play us out tonight with your question. So if you have to leave, just maybe give me a chat or something, and I'll try to get you on before that. Chris, I know you've got a question that I wanted you to be able to ask, and great to see you, my man. You got on mute. Wait, can you hear me? You got on mute, Chris. He's finding it.
I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Thanks for having me, and great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
So I don't follow politics, as you probably know. I teach computer science and yearbook with a local high school in Florida. I kind of trust the system and the fact that the Constitution still works at times. So my question here, as I was following the conversation, you pretty much kind of gave some perspective on the. I was curious how, if anybody has an idea how Vice President Harris would respond to comments on how is she going to implement the whatever she promises if she hasn't taken care of those problems while in part of the administration. So that's pretty much the essence of it.
And I've heard that question a lot. And in fact, Sean Hannity was asking it last night of Terry McAuliffe. They ask it all the time. You know, well, which is it? You know, she's been vice president for 4 years, Tegan. All these things that she wants to do. You know, why didn't she do it while she was in office?
So obviously it's a valid criticism. If Biden were the nominee, you know, it would be the same type of campaign. Biden would be running on this idea that I haven't finished the job. I set forward this agenda. I haven't finished it. I need another term to finish it. Kamala Harris is pretty much in the same way, but because she's a different candidate, I think she has the ability to emphasize things that are more important to her and to her vision. And so there is a difference in the candidates. And while I think she's not doing anything to distance herself from Biden's agenda, she is trying to put her own stamp on it. We saw the first bit of that last week, talking about, you know, the things that she wanted to push, which was, you know, there was this whole effort on price gouging, but the things I found most interesting were some of the more populist ideas, which were, you know, subsidizing home ownership, which is a really interesting and potentially controversial idea. And the idea of, you know, reinstate, you know, in order to deflect some criticism that J.D. Vance has been leveling at the Harris and Biden administration, is to really put a big tax credit for parents, you know, having children, and embracing the idea of supporting families that way. So, you know, are those things that Biden would disagree with? I don't think so. And I think the White House has actually backed most of what Kamala Harris has talked about already. But it's really no different than anybody who runs for a second term. And while she's not technically running for a second term, you know, she's running on the same agenda that she ran on with Joe Biden 4 years ago. So, you know, Republicans are going to talk about that because they've got plenty to say. But the same thing could be said about Donald Trump because he served for president for 4 years. If you think this is such a good idea, A, B, or C, whatever it is, why didn't you do it when you were president? So I think they can really push that right back at Donald Trump, as well as anything. So
Thank you.
thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. There's Jason. You're starting your video. Great. And if you would unmute and go ahead, Jason.
Oh, yeah, hi. Thanks for having me on again. The question I have was just to play devil's advocate. I'm in New York. I'm in New York City. Will be a Harris voter. It seems like all the talk about her momentum and all the trends are going in her direction, that really the only problem that could be happening with her campaign would be self-inflicted, something she, or I guess Tim Walz does, or some kind of third party unknown October surprise. Is there, just to play the strategy of this, to game this out, is there anything the Trump campaign could do at this point to sort of change the entire election and take the lead again? We seem to think that Harris is unstoppable. Only something crazy like a Middle East crisis, even more than it is now, could somehow harm her again with the far left that Chris was talking about. But is there actually anything that the other side could actually do at this point? It seems like the trend lines are so much against it, with North Carolina becoming a toss-up today or yesterday. If you were advising the Trump campaign and he actually would follow the advice, what could they do?
I don't think there's anything that they could do, but at the same time, I don't think that there's much more than Kamala Harris can do other than take this handoff from Biden and establish her own campaign and her own presence. She has more upside because she's a less known quantity among voters, and so she does have the potential to grow. But I do not think that this is a runaway campaign. I think this is an extremely close election. I think there are 7 states that could go either way. she could easily lose this race. And in the Electoral College, if she were to lose 4, 5, or 7, all 7 of those states, it would look ugly. It would be a landslide in the Electoral College. It is a very close race. I mean, I know so many people don't want to talk about polls, and I also advise people don't pay so much attention to the polls now. Let's wait until September. Let's wait until after Labor Day. But the polls as they stand right now, it is a really close race. And the idea that polls back in 2016 and in 2020 underestimated Donald Trump's support, particularly among this base of voters, that he has shown the ability when he's on the ballot to pull them out to the polls, that gives me a ton of pause. So if I'm Kamala Harris's campaign, I'm sure they're worried about this. I'm sure they're trying to figure out how they handle this. But I think this is an extremely close election. I would not be surprised at all if one of these October surprises is something that could potentially move the needle. I mean, when you have to go back to 2016, the reemergence of Anthony Weiner's laptop was just, when you think about it now, like, you can't even make that stuff up. It's crazy, right? It's a crazy plot twist in that election, and yet it happened. And because of everything that happened beforehand, with reporting on the email server and with James Comey and his influence in the race, even though he said he was trying to not influence the race, it was extraordinary. I mean, it was an extraordinary moment in that campaign, which I think there's been plenty of studies that suggest that probably did move the needle away from Hillary Clinton. So we could, if the election is that close, and the last 2 elections have been within 70,000 and 50,000 votes across a handful of states, then that's amazing. So there's a lot of things that could happen. What they are, and trying to predict them, I think that's very hard. And I don't think that there's a lot that you can do if you're the campaign. I think right now, Kamala Harris's campaign is trying to establish herself as the candidate. So she's and try to capture as much of that upside as she possibly could. If there's something that the Trump campaign could do, it's to not let her do that and to define her in their way. Instead, it seems like all they're trying to do is define Tim Walz. They found areas in which they can attack Tim Walz. Most of it hasn't landed, or at least hasn't been very effective, and hasn't really changed in the polls. But it's shocking to me how little they tried to do to Kamala Harris. I mean, with the exception of Donald Trump calling her Comrade Kamala, or of course he doesn't pronounce her name right, but trying to portray her as a communist or as crazy or as stupid. I mean, none of that stuff's working. So the Trump campaign right now is failing in its job to try to define who Kamala Harris is. And with this convention going on so successfully 2 days in, they may have lost their moment.
Tegan, James is
Understood.
listening
Thank
to you answer Jason's question, and he's been going out of his mind because you haven't hit the obvious answer that he wants to pose to you.
All right, James, what is that?
Hello, by the way, from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, up here in the North Country, where the mooses do roam free. I'm going to vote for Harris and hang on the hook for at least 5 minutes until they shoo me away. My proposed answer for Trump would be to take a page from Biden's book. How about a ticket change? It worked for camps. Why not do it on my side? And I think the way Trump would do this, he wouldn't step down himself, because I think that's just unthinkable for the big top leader to do that. But he could go to the second. He likes to do this, bus tire treads on people's backs. He loves it. Take the second guy, toss him, and then put in. I'm guessing who would be best suited to take the reins of J.D. Vance. I think he would go for a female to stack up against Kamala, and I've suggested 3: Elise, Kellyanne, or Tulsi. Those are kind of shooting from the hip, but it's just based on what I've been reading on your wonderful website and Electoral Vote and a few other places.
Look, James, I think it's not outside of the possibility. I don't think it's likely, but if Trump finds himself, if all of a sudden Kamala Harris comes out of this convention with a 5-point bounce and the national polls show Trump trailing by between 7 and 10%, you can bet he'll start looking to things like this. The problem that he has, I think, is that he's missed his convention. He's missed his opportunity to roll out the candidate. It does make him look weak changing the candidate at this point. So he's not going to get the full impact that, say, Kamala Harris got choosing Tim Walz, or that Trump got in a negative way choosing J.D. Vance. So I think that that's a problem. How this candidate would be rolled out would be problematic. Tulsi Gabbard would be an interesting choice, I guess. But if you combine, I mean, here's the thing: if you combine Tulsi Gabbard joining the ticket with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump also getting the endorsement of RFK Jr. in offering him a cabinet post or something like that, I mean, you truly would have a future administration of very nutty individuals. So, it would be an extraordinary thing. I mean, I think if you're Kamala Harris, that's kind of a layup. I don't think the Harris campaign, for instance, is at all worried about Robert Kennedy endorsing Donald Trump at this point. I just don't think that that's an issue. But we'll see. Politics is fascinating.
Think of the worms, Tegan. Think of the worms.
Exactly. I wonder who the dead bear is going to vote for.
Good question.
Thank you, James. And a few people are also, of course, throwing Nikki Haley's name out there. So tonight, Bill Clinton, Tim Walz, Nancy Pelosi, Pete Buttigieg, Josh Shapiro, Amanda Gorman, Adam Kinzinger. Who are you most interested in?
I'm most interested in the big dog himself, Bill Clinton, the explainer in chief, as Barack Obama dubbed him back in 2012. It will be interesting. He's not as dynamic a speaker as he once was, but boy, is he still a smart guy who has the ability to explain things. It would be fascinating to have Bill Clinton actually explain Kamala Harris's policy agenda to Americans and what she's trying to do. Because I think, he's the guy who coined the whole policy wonk term back in 1992. And he's been so good at explaining, public policy to average individuals. I think that would be an amazing thing. So he's the one that I'm most interested in looking at. Looking forward to seeing tonight. I'm interested in Nancy Pelosi just because I have a crush on her. I think she's just the most amazing politician of our lifetime. She's not a great speaker, however. So I think I'll probably settle into reading her book and hopefully reading more about the role she played in Biden's exit, after the election. And Tim Walz is obviously going to be interesting, but I'm most interested in Clinton. I think Tim Walz, I've heard him speak a number of times since he joined the ticket. I think he's definitely a decent speaker. I loved what Obama said last night about his flannel shirts and how they were not put there by some political consultant, that this is exactly who he is. And I think that that's the kind of speech he's going to give. He's going to tell Americans who he is and what values he represents. And I think it could be, I think that alone could be very powerful. But Bill Clinton's the one I'm most looking forward to. How about you?
Who else? So I'm looking forward to Amanda Gorman's poem. It came up I forget if it must have been last night, as we were watching the convention just in our house. We were like, hey, where has Amanda Gorman been? And then all of a sudden today, I don't know if that had been announced previously. If it had, I hadn't seen it. And then all of a sudden today, I saw that she's going to drop a poem tonight. So I'm interested to see that, because I, certainly thought that poem on Biden's inauguration day was extraordinary. Yeah, I mean, you're never going to get me to not tune in to, a Bill Clinton speech, although I get nervous a little bit now. Big Dog's lost a few miles per hour off his fastball, I think. back in his day, it's like, fantasy political speaking, Clinton in his prime versus Obama in his prime. I mean, they both are so good. And I mean, you can't really forget what Clinton did, in the early 90s. And all of a sudden, we've talked about it, his ability to just talk for hours about public policy and tie it to people's lives. So I'm always interested to see him, but I'm a little bit nervous now. Josh Shapiro. I really want to see him, and going back to Andrew's question from earlier, and on a lot of people's minds, I'm anxious to see what he has. So you started to touch on it, but I have been promising Bob Wells, who, for the record, was the first person to have his hand up. Can you turn on your video, Bob? And if you want to, you don't have to. And where are you calling from? And what is that? Is that?
And let's see your T-shirt, Bob.
Is that Nevada? I'm trying to figure that out. Is that?
There we go.
Nevada. What state is that? Is that Nevada?
Arizona.
Arizona. There we go. Okay, I was pretty close.
A workout shirt from the YMCA.
Okay. So I know, and I know Tegan started to touch on it a moment ago, but we got a number of questions on this topic. But Bob was the first one. So Bob, play us out if you would.
Well, it's been pretty clear that RFK Jr. has been struggling from the time Biden stepped down and Harris took over. And then his running mate very cleverly yesterday seemed to announce that he might suspend his campaign. And today it seems to be confirmed by a number of worthy organizations that he will. So I'm trying to figure out, am I happy about that or sad about that, and how things might play out in terms of polling. Who is he drawing from? People that were RFK Jr. people, are they really going to go somewhere? Are they going to stay home? Just what your early speculation might be about RFK Jr. stepping away from his campaign.
Yeah, so the big question is, will he appear on any of the ballots that he's qualified for? And will those states matter? And so I would assume that this early that he can drop off these ballots, and that, for instance, I know there's been some controversy over whether he can be on the ballot in Arizona or not. But if he's not on the ballot in Arizona, I think it's a clear plus for Kamala Harris. The idea that the anti-Trump vote could go anywhere else but to Kamala Harris, I think is a problem for her. And so if his name is removed from the ballot, I think that's a plus. I think it's also a plus for Kamala Harris because of the fact that let's just say that Robert Kennedy's ideological profile is mixed at best. It does not mesh with Donald Trump's, which is also mixed at best, except for the fact that it's kind of nuts and that both of them are kind of nutty. It kind of cements the idea that Donald Trump is a completely transactional politician who is willing to sell out this country for anything. And if he's willing to offer Robert Kennedy a cabinet post, or who knows what else he's offered him in order to get this, we do know that Robert Kennedy has been looking to sell to the highest bidder. It looks like Donald Trump may be the highest bidder at this point. I don't think that that's good for Donald Trump's campaign. I think that just reinforces images that, for instance, the Obamas were making last night about Donald Trump, and that he doesn't really care about anything other than himself. And if he were to join forces with RFK, who he's on the record, giving interviews and talking about RFK as being one of the most liberal politicians in the country, because there was a thought that if you could portray him as a ultra liberal, that would end up hurting the Democrats more. Well, if all of a sudden RFK is joining with Trump, those comments are going to look pretty silly and are going to open up a line of questions for Trump if he were to expose himself to mainstream reporters that I think he'll have a very tough time answering. So my general feeling is that the Harris campaign is not worried at all about this, that they're not really paying attention to it, to be honest, and that they certainly weren't going to play ball with Robert Kennedy when he contacted their campaign. And in fact, it was really interesting at the time those reports came out a week or two ago. It was very interesting because it was very clear that Kennedy did not want those reports out, and that it was Kamala Harris's operatives who were leaking that back to the press, letting them know that he was essentially putting himself out, looking for a job in a future administration. So, I don't think that it matters so much. The only thing is practically, is his name on any of these ballots? Will it be on the ballots, that go out for early voting? Or if he pulls out of the race now, is he just done? If his name is not on these ballots, I think that's only good for Harris.
He announced that press conference on Friday in Phoenix, and
Yep.
Trump will be in Glendale, which is a suburb of Phoenix,
Yep.
later on Friday afternoon. So don't know.
Well, I think it's pretty certain. I mean, when you saw Trump's comments yesterday, talking about what struck me is he was asked, would you offer Kennedy a position in your administration in terms of your endorsement? And Trump was feigning innocence and like, oh, I know nothing about that. Is he really talking about leaving? Stuff like this. And as soon as I read those, it's so interesting that after 9+ years of watching Trump, you kind of know exactly when he's lying. And that's like his go-to way to, dismissing a story. And so as soon as I read them, my instinct, jumped in that he's lying about that. These discussions must be pretty in depth. And so it's not surprising that just a day later, we're hearing stories that Kennedy may endorse Trump. But I just can't see how that's going to be a great story. I also think it's probably an indication that this residency issue in New York that kicked him off the ballot in New York is probably potentially turning into a much bigger problem in other states, and that he's dropping out because he was going to look extremely silly. And you might as well get something while you can get something, because he was going to get nothing and probably be kicked off a lot more ballots.
Yeah. By way of wrapping up, I don't know if there are people on here who are not members, but seriously, folks, for the cost of a venti iced tea, be a member.
Bob, you're awesome. Thank you for reading, and thank you for everybody for reading, and for joining this call. I mean, this is fun. Chris and I did this last week for the first time because I was having a hard time typing. I still have my cast on, but typing's a little bit easier at this point. But this has been an interesting byproduct. These are fun. It's fun chatting with you all about this stuff. I like many of you, I can't get enough of it. So thank you so much for joining, everybody.
Yeah, thanks to everyone. If you would, as you did last time, leave comments on Political Wire. Let us know ideas. DWC, I see your question, and we'd like to get you next time. Chris, next time, type your question into Q&A so I can know what the topic is. Love to bring you in. And Conan, thank you again. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to you. Everyone, thanks for joining.